of the worst things that happened to Christianity was when a bunch of us decided for some reason that Christianity needed to be entirely and totally comprehensible to your average 6-year-old. Hello, Father Sean from St. Edith's Celtic Catholic Church in Shelton, Washington, and I'm here to talk to you today about the readings for the 9th Sunday after Pentecost. Those readings are 1 Kings 3, verses 5 through 12, Psalm 119, verses 65 to 72, Romans chapter 8, verses 28 to 30, and Matthew chapter 13, verses 45 to 52. As usual, it'll come as no surprise when I urge you to read all of those readings because they're really all worth reading. It might come as a little bit of a surprise when I urge you to read Psalm 119 every day for the rest of your life. It's well worth reading every day for the rest of your life, I promise you. Something I think everybody ought to do. So anyway, let's read some readings. I'm going to read to you the reading from 1 Kings and the readings from Romans. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this your people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you." Then we have from Romans, St. Paul says to us, "We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he called, he also justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified." First, I want to make a preliminary note and just say that there's an entire sermon, there's entire books written about the subject of God predestining those some to be called and justified and glorified. And just right off the bat, just to dismiss with that idea, that does not mean that God decides who's going to get saved and who's going to go to hell. That is an idea unworthy of God. It is an insult to his name. God does not decide to send anybody to hell. Pretty horrible person if he does. So, and we Celtic Catholics reject that idea completely and absolutely, and always have for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So, I don't want to deal with that one right now. I'm going to deal with, we know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Now, there's a couple of different translations of that you'll find in English Bibles based on which manuscript tradition the translation prefers. There are a few different versions in the ancient Greek manuscripts of this, but the meaning is all the same. There's just some details in the wording. All things work together for good, or God works all things for good to those who love him. As I said, the same basic meaning, just don't get hung up on if the English translation you're using is worded somewhat differently than the one that I'm using. The meaning's the same, and the manuscript differences are very minor. All things work together for good to them that love God. Now, here's the problem with that verse. Here's the problem with how we Christians sometimes relate to that verse. We sometimes want to make everything out to be nice and easy and neat and tidy, and everything is all tied up in a little bundle with a bow on it. And yet our faith really isn't necessarily that easy, that simple, that neat and tidy, because our faith is a faith that is designed to accompany us through our entire life, from birth to death. And all of the years and all of the accumulated experiences that we have in between being born and dying, all of those things find their way of making sense within the larger context of Christianity, within the faith, within the philosophy that... I didn't put my collar in. Watch, look at that. You want to see how this works? See how that works? Father Sean is a forgetful, silly person sometimes and forgets to put his collar in, and that's all that it is. I mean, that's one version of it. There's other kind of collars too, but this is the one I'm using right now. And it just slips into a little pouch right there. Ta-da! Look at that. Now I look like a priest, don't I? Now I look like I have authority to preach. Yeah, because I have a tab stuck in my collar. That gives me authority. The faith that we hold to is not a faith that makes complete and total sense to your average 6-year-old. So when you ask yourself, how can everything work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purposes, don't give yourself the insurmountable problem of trying to find a nice, easy, neat solution to all of the bad things that you might experience in life. It's really not that simple. Understanding how the events of your life work out for good often requires much time and much wisdom, because the good that God brings out of the events of our life, this is really important. The good that he brings out of the events of our life often happens in spite of the evil that has occurred, not because God created the bad thing in order to produce the good thing. Okay? This is another idea along with predestination that I'm going to tell you just reject, just flat out. God's not a puppet master. God doesn't pull the strings and make every little detail in your life happen. There are people out there who have free will. There are laws of physics out there that don't have free will but act like they do. Things happen as a result of those laws of physics. Things happen as a result of other people making choices, deciding to do things. Sometimes those things that other people decide to do are really bad. Sometimes the things that I decide to do, believe it or not, in spite of the fact that I got a collar here, even so, some of the things that I decide to do are really bad or just stupid. Seriously. And so when this badness happens in our lives and in the world, it isn't that God has set the stage for himself to step in and, ta-da, here's this amazing miracle thing that I'm going to do. often God is working with terrible things that we have done that have no part of his plan, or with terrible things that other people have done that are no part of his plan. When we say God predestines people, we're not talking about God deciding that some people are going to go to heaven and some people are going to go to hell. We are talking about God knowing in advance what happens, because God doesn't know anything in advance, because there is no advance for God, because God's out of time. God doesn't have a before, during, and after. We do. We experience things as before, during, and after. God knows what we're doing. God knows what the laws of physics are doing. God knows what other people are doing. And he works all of that together so that my mind, my soul can, in the midst of that, respond to God and receive from him his gifts. Okay, listen, this is important. Whatever terrible thing goes on in your life, goes on in the world around you, doesn't mean that God's going to magically make everything beautiful. But it does mean that if you ask from him the wisdom that Solomon had, this wisdom that Solomon asked for, if you love God and are seeing the world in terms of him, I can tell you this for sure, that the badness of your life, the horrors of the world, the unpleasantnesses and inconveniences, you can begin to see how out of that God is working his purpose of making you and those who love him and are called according to his purpose, of making you into the person he means you to be. Okay? You will see, with the wisdom that God gave to Solomon because he asked for it, you will see how God is causing even the bad things in your life to produce a result, which is your salvation. And by salvation, I don't mean God magically deciding that you get to go to, arbitrarily deciding that you get to go to heaven. Boom! Rather, I mean becoming conformed to his likeness. Becoming truly identified with Christ, with God on the cross. Okay? All things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose, even the most terrible. But they don't work together for good because there is a pot of gold waiting for you at the end. They work together for good because all of it results in you joining Christ on the cross, and then joining him in hell, and then joining him in his resurrection. All of it works together for good. Not necessarily in a pretty, easy, simple way that your average 6-year-old would understand. But it all works together for good, because God's in charge. However, it takes time and it takes wisdom to see that working out. And it takes some measure of love for God. Because if you only love yourself, honestly, you're not going to see what God has to give you. Really. Anyway, I'm done. That's all I got to say for today. I wish that you will have a wonderful, beautiful, blessed week. I hope that nothing bad will happen to you this week at all. But if it does, I hope that you will have the wisdom and the patience and the love for God to see good come out of it, to see yourself improved by it, and all the world around you. In Jesus' name, amen.